My name is Marissa Hale. I was 33 years old when I gave birth to my son, Elias, on a rainy Wednesday morning, 7 weeks earlier than expected. He came into this world in a blur of panic and pain, too small, too quiet. His tiny body wrapped in wires and tubes, fighting to breathe inside a sterile NICU incubator. I was barely conscious when they wheeled me away from the delivery room. I remember the beep of machines, a nurse whispering something about complications, and then darkness. When I finally woke up the next day, the room was quiet. Too quiet. No baby cries. No husband by my side. Just a nurse, young and nervous, who quickly left when I asked, "Where's my son?" They told me Elias was safe, that he was under care. But what they didn't say, not right away, was that he wasn't with me. That I wasn't even listed as the primary guardian. Didn't make sense. I was his mother. I had carried him for 8 months. I had every ultrasound, every blood test. I had signed every hospital form. But according to the files now, the legal guardian was my husband's mother, Helen. And I had been classified as mentally unfit to care for him due to postpartum psychosis risk. Words I never saw coming. Words that broke me more than the cesarean scar healing on my belly. My husband, Dean, came to see me later that day. He didn't bring flowers, or food, or even photos of Elias. He sat down beside the hospital bed and folded his hands in his lap like we were about to talk business. "Marissa," he said, not meeting my eyes. "I had to make some tough decisions. You weren't well during the pregnancy. The doctors saw signs. I wasn't well. I was nauseous. I was tired. I was pregnant. They evaluated you, Riss," he cut in sharply. "They said you had signs of dissociation. That you talked to yourself, didn't respond to questions, cried for no reason. I had to act fast. That's what pregnancy looks like, Dean. That's what grief looks like. After losing my father while pregnant." But he was unmoved, cold, methodical, like this had all been planned. And deep down I realized, maybe it had. By the time I was discharged from the hospital 2 days later, I had no job to return to. The local library where I worked said they'd filled the position temporarily, while I was on maternity leave. But someone else now sat at my desk. No apartment to go back to either. Dean had downsized and moved in with his mother. Our lease cancelled, and my access to our shared bank account frozen for legal clarity, the lawyer said. I walked out of that hospital with nothing but a diaper bag and a discharge sheet. And the sinking realization that I had been erased. The days that followed were unbearable. I stayed at a budget motel just off the interstate, using what little cash I had left. The manager, a kind woman named Doreen, let me stay a few nights for free when I couldn't pay. She didn't ask questions, just handed me a key and a blanket. I called everyone. Legal aid, child services, even Dean's old college friends, trying to understand what was happening. But everywhere I turned, I was met with dead ends and quiet pity. They spoke to me like I was broken, like I was unstable. One social worker said flat out, "You're currently classified as temporarily unfit to parent due to medical concerns flagged by the hospital. You can request a re-evaluation in 6 months. 6 months. My baby would barely recognize me by then." It was Doreen who handed me the letter. She found it tucked inside a box of my things that had been delivered to the front desk. The return address was my grandmother's old house, long since sold after her death. I opened it, expecting some old paperwork or forgotten card. But inside was a single sheet of paper, yellowed at the edges and folded neatly. It was my grandmother's handwriting. "Marissa, if you are reading this, then something has gone wrong. I hoped you would never need this, but life isn't always fair to women like us, especially when the world smiles on charming liars in suits. You don't know this yet, but you have more power than you realize. The house, the land, the account your grandfather opened before he passed. Oh, yours, and something else too. You have my power of attorney, full, activated the day I passed. If anyone ever tries to take from you, your rights, your child, your voice, Go to the red box I left in the attic. You'll find the papers. And something more. You're not alone, sweetheart. Not now. Not ever. I held the letter in my trembling hands, reading it again and again. Every word was a lifeline. Dean thought he'd taken everything, but he'd forgotten about her. My grandmother, Ada Hale, had been sharp, private, and fiercely protective. She never trusted Dean, said he smiled too easily. And now, 3 years after her death, she was protecting me in a way I never imagined. I packed my things, left a thank you note for Doreen, and bought a one-way bus ticket. The house was still there, just outside of town, buried under ivy and memory. It had sat empty, in legal limbo since her passing, but it was mine. That night, I climbed into the dusty attic with a flashlight and found it, the red box tucked behind an old cedar chest. Inside were legal documents, bank statements, and a set of signed forms granting me full power of attorney over every asset Ada ever owned. There was also a flash drive. No label, just a red dot on the corner. I didn't know it then, but that drive held something that would change everything. Emails, documents, a recorded conversation. All of it linking Dean and his mother to a private psychiatric consultant. One who had submitted the initial mental instability report that triggered the custody change. They'd paid him. They'd faked the evaluation. They'd orchestrated everything. But I wasn't ready to go to court yet. I needed more. I needed a plan, a witness, a lawyer who believed me. And I had to do it carefully, because if Dean knew I was coming for Elias, he would fight harder. I sat in the kitchen, staring at a photo of my son on the hospital discharge sheet. It was small, so perfect. They took my baby, my job, my dignity, but they forgot one thing. I don't give up, not when it comes to him. And this time I wasn't fighting alone. The next morning, I stood in front of the county records building wearing borrowed clothes from a thrift store donation bin and holding Ada's legal documents in my hand. The clerk behind the glass window barely looked at me. But when she saw the notarized power of attorney and property deed, her eyebrows lifted. "Wait here," she said, disappearing behind a frosted door. 10 minutes later, I walked out with something I hadn't had in weeks. Leverage. The house was officially mine. Not just the structure, but the land, the title, and a modest bank account connected to a credit union under my grandmother's name. She'd kept it hidden from probate. Not out of malice, but for protection. And now I knew why. Dean always hated Ada. He said she was controlling and cryptic. But what she was smart. She saw him coming long before I did. I spent the next 2 days cleaning the house room by room, bringing it back to life. I slept on a floor mattress, ate boxed mac and cheese. And each night, I studied the contents of the red box like my survival depended on it. Because it did. That flash drive wasn't just a backup. It was a bomb. There were emails between Dean and Dr. Felix Trent, the psych consultant who'd submitted the evaluation to the hospital. I cross-referenced the letterhead. Turns out he wasn't even licensed in our state. Then came the voice recording. A scratchy audio file, picked up from what sounded like a phone speaker. Dean's voice. "We just need her flagged temporarily. Nothing permanent. Enough to delay her access. You get your transfer, I get the paperwork. My mom handles the rest." Dr. Trent. "And if someone checks the file?" Dean. "No one will. No one cares. She doesn't have the energy to fight." He was wrong. I made 3 copies of everything. One for myself, one for safekeeping, and one I mailed to a woman named Eileen Massey, an attorney I remembered from a local newspaper article about medical ethics. She used to work for Child Protective Services before quitting over systemic failures. I found her office tucked between a laundromat and a payday loan shop. She was brusque, mid-40s, with a sharp bob and an even sharper stare. I laid everything on her desk. My story. A letter. Audio. A file. Photos. The power of attorney. She didn't speak for a full 2 minutes. Then she looked at me and said, "Let's burn them down, one legal page at a time." The next few weeks were a blur of planning and rebuilding. Eileen moved fast. She filed for an emergency motion to reopen my custody evaluation, arguing that the original psychiatric report was invalid due to fraud. She sent a formal letter to the medical board demanding an investigation into Dr. Felix Trent. She even contacted a former NICU nurse who had cared for Elias, the same nurse who had been mysteriously transferred just days after Dean's mother took over. The nurse agreed to testify. Piece by piece we built our case. But Dean wasn't sitting idle. A few days before our preliminary court hearing, someone broke into my grandmother's house. They didn't take much, just tore through drawers, scattered papers, and tried to access the attic. But they were sloppy, and they left behind a pair of muddy boot prints that matched Dean's size, and a cigarette stub I recognized from Helen's brand. Eileen documented everything, added it to the case file, and warned me, "They're scared." That's good. But now we need to move faster. The hearing was set for May 12th, exactly 2 months after Elias had been born. I hadn't seen him in 52 days. Not a single visit. No photo updates. No calls. No updates from the foster guardian that Helen had chosen, one of her church friends. But the night before the hearing I received an email. No subject line. No sender name. Just a photo attachment. Elias, sleeping on a checkered blanket I didn't recognize. A pacifier clipped to his onesie. His cheeks full and flushed. And in the background, a blurry shadow I immediately recognized. Helen. She was holding a phone in one hand, and what looked like a prescription bottle in the other. Eileen was already on it. She'd anticipated something like this and subpoenaed Helen's medical history along with a request for toxicology data from the baby's last hospital visit. She suspected sedation. Or worse, we couldn't prove it yet. But now the court would start asking the right questions. When I walked into the courtroom that next morning, I didn't look like the woman they'd tried to erase. My hair was clean. My clothes were simple but pressed. My eyes didn't shake. Dean smirked when he saw me. But it faded fast when Eileen opened her folder and handed the judge a USB drive, a notarized letter from the NICU nurse, and a full transcript of the audio. The judge listened, took notes. Dean fidgeted. Helen didn't make eye contact. And when the judge asked Dean if he had prior financial dealings with Dr. Trent, his lawyer hesitated. That hesitation was everything. The judge scheduled a full hearing for the following week, in open court. That meant press, transparency, child advocate, everything Dean wanted to avoid. But there was one more detail Eileen had saved for last. She handed the judge a sealed envelope with a notarized document from my grandmother's estate. It declared that the house, land, and all related assets had been transferred to me prior to her passing, and that any move to institutionalize me could be considered a violation of testamentary intent. In other words, Dean's attempts to discredit me were not only fraudulent, they were an attack on a legal inheritance. That wasn't just a family matter anymore. That was fraud. And judges take fraud very seriously. As we walked out of the courtroom, Dean grabbed my arm. "You're making a mistake, Marissa. This can all go away if you just..." Pulled my arm free. Looked him dead in the eyes. "The only mistake I made was thinking you ever wanted to be a father." And then I walked away. Back at Ada's house, I lit a candle beside her old rocking chair. I sat there for a while watching the flame. There was still a full trial ahead. Still paperwork. Still interviews and character witnesses and home inspections. But for the first time since Elias was born, I was winning. They took everything from me. But they forgot the one major thing. You never corner a woman who has nothing left to lose, and a grandmother who planned for everything. The courthouse steps were crowded that morning. I had no idea the case had drawn this much attention, until I saw the small local press van parked across the street and a young woman with a microphone whispering, "That's her. That's the mother." The case had quietly gone public. Not because I made it that way, but because the judge had unsealed a portion of the documents after Eileen's fraud allegation. And once the media got a whiff of a grandmother's estate, forged mental health records, a stolen baby, and a well-connected ex-husband, they were hungry. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Inside the courtroom, everything felt sharper. There. The lighting. The sound of footsteps echoing off the marble. It wasn't just a custody hearing now. It was a reckoning. Dean sat across from me at the defendant's table. He looked like he hadn't slept. His mother, Helen, wore her usual string of pearls and a mask of polite disdain. But this time they were both flanked by two attorneys. I guess even they knew the storm was coming. Judge Feldman entered. He was known for being direct. He didn't smile, didn't nod, just got straight to it. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that evidence submitted during preliminary review includes a potential fraud case, a violation of medical ethics, and improper use of mental health documentation, all of which will now be considered in this hearing. Dean's face went pale. Eileen rose to her feet. Your Honor, we would like to submit two final pieces of evidence. The first is a video recording sent by an anonymous source 3 nights ago. Dean's head snapped up. Helen shifted in her seat. The courtroom monitor blinked to life. In the video, Helen stood in a kitchen, cradling Elias. A wine glass sat on the counter. She spoke on speakerphone. Dean's voice came through clearly. You need to keep him quiet. The court visits next week. No bruises, no crying, nothing weird. We're walking a thin line here. Helen replied. I've been giving him half of the dose. He sleeps most of the day. It's better that way. Good. Keep it that way. If she gets him back, we're screwed. The room went dead silent. The judge turned to Dean. Mr. Hale, do you deny the voice on this recording is yours? Dean opened his mouth. But nothing came out. That was all Eileen needed. She stood tall, looked the judge in the eye and said, We formally request immediate restoration of full parental custody to Ms. Hale, and the filing of criminal charges against both Mr. Hale and Ms. Helen Hale for fraud, endangerment, and perjury. The judge didn't even deliberate long. He banged the gavel once. Custody is hereby restored. All parental rights reinstated immediately. The court will contact the district attorney's office regarding potential criminal prosecution. Bailiff, escort the child into chambers immediately. I didn't cry at first. Couldn't. It was too much. Too fast. Too surreal. But when the courtroom door opened and the social worker stepped in carrying Elias, when I saw his tiny face turn toward mine, his eyes wide, when I felt his weight settle into my arms for the first time in nearly 2 months, that's when I broke. Every tear I'd held back, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt and rage and despair, gone in a single breath against my neck as he curled into me. Hi, baby, I whispered. I'm here now. Dean tried to follow us out of the courtroom, but the bailiff stopped him. So did a uniformed officer who approached with a clipboard and a warrant. Turns out, the medical board had moved faster than expected. Dr. Felix Trent had been arrested the night before in another state, and he was already talking. 2 weeks later, I sat in the nursery I'd rebuilt in Ada's house. Sunlight streamed through the window onto the freshly painted walls. Elias slept in his crib, his breathing soft and steady. I was holding a new letter, this one from the state, confirming that all charges against me had been dropped. My record, cleared. My custody, permanent. Dean and Helen were both under investigation. Their assets frozen. Their reputations scorched. And while I knew it wouldn't undo what had happened, it was justice. Ada would have liked that. There was one more item left in the red box, taped to the bottom. I hadn't seen it before. A small envelope with my name in Ada's handwriting. Inside was a photo. Me as a little girl standing next to Ada on the porch of this very house. And behind it, a simple note. You come from a line of women who survive, not because we're lucky, but because we're prepared. Love, Grandma. They took my baby. They took my job. They tried to take my dignity. But they forgot one thing. I come from survivors. And survivors always find their way home. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. If you like this story, please subscribe to our channel to receive more stories every day. Share with us what you think of this story and tell us where you're watching from.